this meeting, and we are live streaming to Facebook. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have a little bit of vulnerability because our meeting is publicly posted, so there may be an interruption because that makes us vulnerable to people coming in, kids or whatever, to hooligans. Hooligans might come in and interrupt us. If they do, it'll just take us a moment to remove them, and it should be a fairly brief disruption. So we're gonna try to keep that to a minimum. If people come in after 15 minutes, after 10:15, we are not going to admit them into the meeting, and we will send them a message that says they can watch live on Facebook. So welcome all of you. Thank you so much. I will also tell you that please mute yourselves, and that I will mute you if you forget to mute. So when it comes to the question and answer period, you may have to unmute yourself. So remember to do that, please. And without further ado, I am going to introduce Sandy Eads, who is our former president, our just past president, and who we are lucky enough, he had an inside track to getting Tiffany Muller to come and speak for us today. And so, Sandy, take it away, please.
Thanks, Ann. Well, it is kind of a strange one. But I want to give thanks to Adam Bazzi and Tino Lukowski and Linda Gassman for working with the program committee to help set this up. And that program committee is led by Pauline Testerman to get Tiffany to us today. The connection, truly random. Pam Vernon, who's on this Zoom.
What were you talking about?
Is a longtime friend, and she invited my wife Susan and I to New Year's Eve dinner 3 years ago with Skip and Linda Muller, Tiffany's dad and stepmom. And well into the beverages, I mentioned that I was in the league, and sort of conversation roamed all over the place. And Skip said, he told us about Tiffany and what she was doing, and I was rather blown away. And so we figured, well, with a local connection, we'd finagle a speaking engagement here.
Sandy, I'm so sorry I muted you accidentally. So sorry. Sandy, you gotta unmute.
Let's start that over.
So sorry. You were into your drinks at the dinner party when I accidentally muted you.
Fine. So in the course of the conversation, I mentioned I was in the league and active with the league. And Skip said, well, my daughter is head of In Citizens United, and the light bulb went off. And so we really got into an active conversation. And I thought maybe we'd finagle a speaking engagement in person in Kansas City, and sort of tie it in with a trip here, maybe to see family. Then COVID. So it's my pleasure to introduce Tiffany Muller in person, in Zoom person today. She said we could edit this bio a little bit because it's long, but I'm reluctant to do that because it really covers a lot of different areas that I think describe her as a person. Of course, she's the president and executive director of In Citizens United, Jason Kander's group Let America Vote, and In Citizens United Let America Vote Action Fund. Since starting In Citizens, she's overseen that from a startup to a 4 million member organization with 800,000 grassroots donors. The league should be so fortunate. Since it was founded 7 years ago, they've raised over $130 million on the basis of average contributions of just $14. The group has elevated reforming Washington as a national priority. That's led to the Vote for the People Act introduction, and She was named to Washington's list of the 250 most influential people in Washington. This is the Washingtonians list. She started in politics and government when she was the first openly gay public official in Kansas in 2004 as a member of the Topeka City Council, where she led successful efforts to expand anti-discrimination practices. She's also been described as a force of nature and a high-quality leader who can grasp the responsibility to a larger cause. She was Kathleen Sebelius's research director, as well as running a political research firm based in Florida, where she worked on some of the biggest races in the country. 10 years ago, she was the vice president of political operations at Victory Fund in a record-breaking year for LGBTQ candidates that included electing the first openly LGBTQ US senator and doubling as LGBTQ representation in Congress, doubling the representation. She served as chief of the staff of 2 members of Congress and was deputy political director at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, where she worked with top-tier races across the country. She got her undergraduate degree from Washburn University in Topeka and her master's from the University of Maryland. She sits on the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. She's a diehard fan of the Kansas City Chiefs and U.S. women's soccer, and she lives in Washington with her wife and their daughter. Tiffany, it's my real pleasure to welcome you to, or back to, Kansas City.
Sandy, thank you so much for that incredible introduction. And I mean, how many of us can say that their dad going out and getting a little tipsy leads to speaking engagements? But with my dad, I'm not surprised at all. Sandy didn't say this, but my dad has been a long-term public servant in his little town of Cleveland, Missouri, where he basically has served on city council and helped run the town, and is such an incredibly hard worker and so passionate. And I don't know, it's incredibly touching that out at drinks, what he did was bragged about his daughter, right? That's very sweet. And Sandy talked about where I got my start. I am from Missouri. I grew up just about an hour and a half south of Kansas City, got my political start in Topeka, Kansas. And as Sandy said, I was the first openly gay public official in Kansas, in Topeka, home of Westboro Baptist Church and everything that comes with, in a time that was really, really hard to do gay rights work, right? 2004, if you all remember, Karl Rove engineered anti-gay marriage amendments all across the country. And here we are in Topeka, Kansas, fighting to expand anti-discrimination legislation to protect people from being fired or kicked out of their house. And without the League of Women Voters and their help in that effort, there's no way we would have gotten that done, and no way that we would have ever been able to defend that measure on the ballot, because it was up for repeal in April of 2005. And so throughout my career, since leaving Kansas, every time someone talks to me about kind of grassroots energy, volunteers, how to create change, what comes to mind for me is the women, the incredible women and men that I worked with in Topeka that headed up the league there, right? One of whom just recently passed away, Betsy, who is a dear friend and mentor to me. And so thank you all for doing the incredible work you do each and every day. And I can already tell that you are running an incredible chapter here. And Sandy, I'm so glad that you got drunk with my dad one night and that it led to this. So this is going to be great. So as Sandy said, I am Tiffany Muller and I am president of In Citizens United and Let America Vote. And our mission is really simple. We want to get big money out of politics, and we want to protect and expand the access to the ballot box. And we have 4 million members across the country, I think around 30,000 right there in Missouri. And we're really proud of the fact that we are trying to make sure that our government works for all of us by including all of us in the fight to get back that government. So I have some slides. We're going to talk about what's going on with our democracy, the attack that it's under, what we're seeing, and then we're just going to open it up to some Q&A. That sound good? All right. When I share my slides, it's going to be hard for me to see you all. So if you need to stop me, just holler at me. Okay, awesome. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay. Let me pull up the slideshow. Turn off that. Everyone see that okay? All right, fantastic. I could see a few heads nodding. So like I said, our mission's pretty simple. We want to overturn Citizens United, which we're going to talk about in a minute. We want to get big money out of politics, protect the freedom to vote. And we do this through making sure that we have the right leaders in office. So we help champions of our democracy win their elections. So we help elect people who are really prioritizing the issues of anti-corruption, getting money out of politics, protecting the freedom to vote. And then we also fight for policy changes. And we're really proud to lead the effort to try to help pass the Freedom to Vote Act, the For the People Act, which became the Freedom to Vote Act in Congress. And why is it necessary that we do what we do? Well, this is not going to shock any of you, but Americans across the country right now, frankly, believe that our democracy is at risk. Over half of voters actually think our democracy is at risk of extinction, with almost 2/3 of Americans believing our democracy is in crisis. And why do they feel this way? Well, mostly because they see a government here in Washington and frankly in state capitals across the country that isn't working for them, that is working for just a few special big interests. So whether it's, the fight to lower prescription drug costs and how that is time and time again blocked, but people's prescription drug prices keep going up. Whether it's the fact that 95% of Americans think that we need to have common sense background checks to reduce gun violence, but that's been blocked for 25 years. Or how about climate change and the fact that prior to the Citizens United ruling, there were 14 instances of Senate Republicans working with Senate Democrats to address the issues that we're seeing related to climate change. But since the Citizens United ruling and the money we've seen flood into the system, there's been none. So I think that when I go around and talk to voters across the country, what I hear is they just feel left further and further behind, and like their voice and frankly their vote doesn't really matter. And so they're just losing faith in the system. And it's not just about controlling policy outcomes, although that's a big part of it, and we're going to talk more about that. But what we've also seen is that these same corporate big money interests have also captured the court. And that what it's doing is it's pushing the court further and further to the right. It's threatening reproductive freedom. It's threatening the ability for workers to organize and to collectively bargain. Obviously, it's gutted the Voting Rights Act and had serious repercussions on our ability to access the ballot box. And with Citizens United, our voices are all getting drowned out by the big money that we're seeing flood into the system. And right now we're in the midst of an inflation crisis, the highest inflation we've seen in 40 years, right? And what we see is that many corporations are using it as an excuse to actually gouge prices even more, raise them without any checks or balances on their power. And so I think that Americans feel all of those things, and it makes them really disenfranchised with the system. So how did we get there? How did we get here? Well, our name is End Citizens United. We tend to think that the Citizens United decision was one of the most disastrous of my lifetime. And for those who don't remember, or those watching at home, it was a 5-4 decision in 2010, where basically the Supreme Court took two really terrible ideas and it merged them together. And it said money equals speech and corporations are people. And it merged those two things together to allow unlimited and unchecked political spending into our system. It overturned 100 years of precedent, actually. And what we've seen since then is pretty drastic spending. So just since the 2010 decision, there's been $7.4 billion of outside spending in federal election. That's billion with a B. In 2020 alone, there was over $1 billion of what we call dark money spending in our elections. That means we actually don't know where it came from. We can't trace it back. It's undisclosed, it's anonymous. And since the 2010 ruling, there's been $5 billion spent by super PACs, which, you know, just for fun is roughly 5 times the Royals payroll for the same decade. So we didn't do the Chiefs. That was, no, I can't let them go that close to home. And what we've seen really is that this is also increasing. This is just some more examples, you know, so from in 2006, there was only $5 million of dark money that was spent in the 2006 election. And that increased up to $1 billion in 2020. Before the ruling, before the Citizens United ruling, about 75% of the money spent in elections, we actually knew where it came from. We could trace it back. We could hold people accountable for it. Now it's 75% of the money we actually don't know where it comes from. And who's spending all this money? Well, no surprise, corporate special interests really got into the game following the ruling. So you can see since the Citizens United ruling, Wall Street has spent $3.6 billion to influence elections and on lobbying. The gun lobby has spent $302 million, and Big Pharma has spent $1.8 billion. That's a lot of money, but it really pales in comparison to the return on investment that they're getting off of that money, right? Well, Wall Street got got an almost $2 trillion corporate tax cut and handout in the 2017 tax bill. The Big Pharma, just by being able to keep Congress from passing Medicare negotiation, keeps $20 billion of profit every single year. Right. So these are small investments for their bottom line, but it's coming at the expense of all of us, and it's coming at the expense of American families. So who are these big donors outside of the corporations? Who are these big, ultra wealthy folks who are spending all this money? Most of this won't surprise you all at all. First of all, it's a very small amount of folks. I'm really proud. I think Sandy talked about it a little bit at the beginning. I'm really proud that in Citizens United, what we've done is we've actually built a movement of small dollar donors coming together who really care about this issue. So we have 800,000 small dollar donors who've given $14 as an average contribution. But that's not what's funding most of our elections in this country. Instead, what you see are these really big donors funding most of it. So you can see 11 donors gave $1 billion to super PACs in just 8 years. That was almost 20% of all spending during that time. And the top 100 donors and their spouses gave over $2 billion to outside spending in the last decade alone, just 100 donors. And who are they? Well, no surprise, they are overwhelmingly white. 97% of them are white. They're overwhelmingly male. Women only account for 8.2% of the contributions. And this skews then what policy outcomes they're pushing for, right? Because they have a vastly different take on what their goals are than what everyday Americans' goals are. So they want to make sure that they don't have to pay a fair tax rate. And I'm being general, there are definitely some billionaires and millionaires who are fighting for a more fair tax code. But in general, what we see is that they want to set up a tax system that benefits them and that allows them to continue to accumulate wealth. And that's the tax system that we've seen implemented by our government. They want deregulation. They want gas and oil companies, big banks, big pharma to be able to continue to pad their profit and their bottom line without any government accountability. And frankly, they want to cut government programs like Social Security and Medicare. And there are many elected officials who have tried to weaken and cut those programs for that very reason. Less than half of wealthy donors actually support reining in Wall Street and the abuses that we saw from Wall Street that led to the 2008 crash. And only 40% of wealthy donors support legislation to combat climate change. Only 40%. So that's not what we see that everyday Americans want. And 2020 is a good example of how this played out. There was, it was in summer of 2020. So there had already been the first COVID relief package that had passed at the beginning of 2020. And the pandemic continued to drag on. I'm sure all of you remember those days, as I do. And American families really desperately needed help, right? Small businesses were going under, people were losing their jobs. They needed help paying the bills. And Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans continued to hold up the package of aid, not because they thought that American families needed more help, but they wanted to make sure that corporations got liability protections so that they couldn't be held accountable for putting their workers in danger. And it was held up for months and months and months while this fight played out on Capitol Hill. Eventually, the package passed. Speaker Pelosi helped make sure that those liability protections were kept out of the package. But I don't want you to worry about these big donors because they still got plenty. First, there was a $2.5 billion race car track write-off because that was needed at the time, right? There was a $120 billion tax cut written into the bill for the top 1%. And most importantly, corporate titans got to write off the 3 martini lunches with the $6.3 billion business meal write-off. So, you know, families, and I know many families I grew up with who needed the help, I'm sure they were really happy to wait the months and months and months that took so that, you know, 3 martini lunches could be written off. If my dad didn't tell you, Sandy, I'm a bit of a sarcastic person, so I apologize for my flippantness. It just makes me so angry. And you know, the other thing we know is that it stacks who can even run for office, who can even open the door, and whether or not our government's going to be representative of a diverse America, right? So a system that allows unlimited spending from these donors ends up creating a system that unfairly benefits and advantages wealthy white men who are running for office. And what we know is that if we could change that to where we had a small dollar donor matching program, it actually would help women candidates and candidates of color be able to run a successful campaign, because we know that those candidates are already having to rely more on grassroots power. And we should be wanting to democratize our elections and bring more people into the system. So here's the other thing that we see. We're also seeing this really dangerous nationwide attack on our freedom to vote. In 2021, there were 19 states that enacted 34 laws that restricted the freedom to vote. And there are hundreds more that are being pushed this year still. What we saw is that Heritage Action and a few other right-wing dark money groups bragged about spending over $42 million in order to coordinate and pass these bills. As a matter of fact, and here's where all they were working at. As a matter of fact, at their conference last year, they bragged about how easy it was to actually get state legislators to introduce the bills that they had written and how to get them passed in the middle of the night, and how they created these kind of fake AstroTurf groups to help push them on the local level. And what we've seen are these really horrible bills being passed across the country. I know you all are following this, but just a few. Texas, SB 1. This is the bill that made absentee voting much more difficult. It banned drive-through voting. It banned most drop boxes, and it created new ways about how you had to vote by mail. And Texas already had one of the hardest laws around vote by mail as it was, that only certain people can vote by mail, and it's really difficult. Missouri has some similar restrictions. But they basically put into place all of these additional ID requirements, under the guise of the big lie that there's all this election fraud going on, which we know isn't true. And here's what we saw. Texas has one of the earliest primaries in our country. And so they just went through their primary with this new law in place, and it led to 13% of all mail ballots being rejected. 13%. Anything over 1% is cause for concern and investigation. And there were 13%. The most rejections were exactly where they had targeted them and wanted them to be. It was from the Houston area, from Harris County, from predominantly areas with Democratic voters or African-American voters, right? This isn't by chance or coincidence. This is by design. Georgia, we see some of the same things that have been pushed there in Senate Bill 202, not only, of course, with the restrictions on how voting can take place and some of the more egregious pieces of that bill, like criminalizing handing out food or water to people who are waiting in line, with lines that have been created by shutting down polling locations in predominantly communities of color, but also the ability for state partisan officials to come in and take over local election counties, right? To be able to set up the infrastructure to overturn future elections. And just this past week, we saw Georgia pass yet another bill that gave the state law enforcement agency, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the ability to investigate elections and quote unquote election fraud. They're literally putting a criminal investigation agency on this false path of going to investigate claims of election fraud, which is really just one more way to try to intimidate voters. I won't go through all of Florida. Montana is the other one up there, in case you didn't recognize the great state of Montana, because I wanted to point out it's happening all over the country. In Montana, they've had same-day registration in Montana for decades. It was passed with Republican support. Obviously, Montana is a pretty red state, but they think that same-day registration helped John Tester win that Senate seat. So they have outlawed same-day registration in order to make sure that college kids have a harder time voting. And this is all interconnected, right? We're talking about what sometimes seems like separate things: spending, policy outcomes, voting attacks, but it's all interconnected, and it's all being driven by just a few big mega donors and a few big dark money groups. So this is a good kind of graphic, I hope, to kind of show how this works. You have the Kochs, the DeVosses, the Ulines, the Mercers, who give big money to these big dark money groups, so we can't even trace the money back. Places like Heritage or Federalist Society or the National Christian Foundation or the Judicial Crisis Network, they employ the same party operatives and the same political operatives that candidates and the national party employ. And then what they do is they actually create these really innocuous sounding groups, Americans for a Better America type of thing. And then they try to make it look like this is all very grassroots powered and grassroots run, these AstroTurf campaigns, to all push the same bad bills. Let me show you how this plays out. And they're doing it all across the board. Critical race theory, anti-voter legislation, all of the attacks right now on the LGBTQ community across the country, what they've done with the courts and capturing the courts, and of course, anti-choice legislation that's going on across the country. You can see that each of these kind of big mega donors have a hand in each one of those. So if we break it down, you can see what happened with the critical race theory movement is a really good example. This was really created out of thin air by conservative billionaires and dark money groups last year. And basically what they did is the Federalist Society, Heritage Foundation, the Kochs, created all of these fake astroturf groups. So you can see there, Parents Against Critical Theory. Well, that sounds like there are lots of parents involved, right? Except it wasn't grassroots. It was created with paid organizers who were also working for some of these other groups, 1776 Action or Fight for Schools. They're then paid to go disrupt school board meetings or to go disrupt curriculum hearings or to go testify at state legislatures. And they create these culture wars kind of out of thin air, and they take legitimate anxieties about education, particularly during the pandemic, and they turn it into this culture war. But they're all funded by the same people. And they do that on issue after issue after issue. Right now, we're seeing it on the attacks on LGBTQ community. And, I think that since 2004, since we started talking about my gay rights work in 2004, this is probably the most coordinated attack I've seen on the community since then, where we have hundreds of bills being introduced and passed across the country, from attacks on trans students participating in sports, to the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, to the Tennessee legislature just pushing and trying to pass a bill to ban same-sex marriage, even though there's a Supreme Court ruling around it. And again, these are all being funded by these national dark money groups, which have put in $100 million from just a few donors to the National Christian Foundation and the Alliance for Defending of Freedom. Again, what does that even mean? To fight against equality and to push these wedge issues. Choice, we're seeing the same thing. We have seen 108 restrictive abortion laws passed in just the last few years, all being funded by the same kind of big money donors and big dark groups. In Oklahoma, they just passed an outright ban on abortion in Oklahoma because they want the court challenges, right? They think that they're going to win the court challenge that's coming down the pike from the Supreme Court in June. And I got to be honest, I'm really, really worried about a country where in June we could end up in a place where they revert back to states' rights and suddenly there is no access to abortion in 26 states. And like we talked about before, they've captured the courts. So over the past several decades, these same folks have spent about $400 million to radicalize the courts and to drag it further to the right. Since 2016, just to pack the Supreme Court, the Judicial Crisis Network spent about $52 million. 34 million of that came from one person, one secret donor. We don't know who it is, right? But it begs the question, do the justices know who it is? Do you think they feel thankful or indebted? What we do know is that, I'll get to this in 1 second. What we do know is that by stacking the court, that what we've created is a court that is both attacking democracy through things like not cracking down on gerrymandering, gutting the Voting Rights Act, allowing things like Citizens United, attacking workers' rights to organize. I think that this court is going to be known for, if anything, for its attacks on our democracy and its attacks on the very foundations of what makes our democracy work. So this is the network behind the dark money and the Supreme Court. And I know that's a lot of stuff to look at. So we'll just pull out one little example here. Leonard Leo is a conservative legal activist. He runs the Federalist Society. And for those who don't remember, the Federalist Society was the ones who came up with the approved list that Trump took his nominations from for the Supreme Court, right? They all had to be vetted through the Federalist Society. And his mission is literally to transform the courts from an independent arbiter to partisan courts that will do his bidding. He actually has said these are political campaigns to him. And so he has this network of dark money groups where it all raises money. And he was the president of Wellspring Committee at the same time, and associated with the Judicial Crisis Network, which spent $52 million with ads and lobbying, and ended up blocking the nomination of Merrick Garland and packing the court with Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. I've given you a lot of depressing stuff. So what can we do? Well, first and foremost, we all have to continue to be in this fight, because there has never been a more critical moment for our democracy and for our country. And the other side isn't stopping. And the forces who want to weaken our democracy and make our government work for just a few people, they're not stopping, so we can't either. First and foremost, we have to fight disinformation. There is a ton of disinformation out there, from elections to issues, and trusted brands like the League of Women Voters are critical in helping push back on that disinformation. Number two, we have to work to pass proactive legislation to end dark money and to protect the access to the ballot box. We talk a lot about stopping the attacks, and that's really important. But there's also proactive work we can be doing. In Citizens United and Let America Vote, we were leading the effort to pass the Freedom to Vote Act on the federal level, which would have done all of these things. And we came up just short. Now, we're not going to stop fighting at the federal level, but we are also going to double down on our efforts in state levels, like Nevada's vote by mail law that they recently passed, or Montana has the best disclosure law in the country. Other states can actually learn from that, and we can help pass that in other states as well. We have to continue to register voters. And I know that this is work that you all through the league do each and every day. And it's incredible and so needed, especially when we're seeing more and more voters kicked off the rolls, or not knowing how to vote, or having to jump through more and more barriers and hurdles to vote. Again, work like what you're doing through the league is so important. We have to sign up more poll workers. We have to challenge the harassment we're seeing at the polls. One of the things that we've seen over the last few years that I honestly never thought I'd see is that poll workers are kind of resigning en masse because of the amount of harassment and threats that they are facing. So we have to both make sure that we are passing laws to protect them, and also finding new poll workers to be able to help call out voter intimidation tactics and stand up to what we're seeing happen at the polling place. And of course, there's stuff we can do federally as well. We need to make sure that we confirm President Biden's nominees to the post office board. How many of us thought 2 years ago we would suddenly all be experts on the post office board and how important that is to vote by mail? We have to keep pushing to end partisan gerrymandering and make sure that we have nonpartisan redistricting across the country. I know eventually maybe Missouri will get around to passing a new map, but we really need nonpartisan redistricting across the country. One of the things that we're going to be really focused on over the next 7 months is really working to elect champions of our democracy, pro-democracy reform candidates who are going to go fight these fights. And we have to just keep doing the work every single day, even when it's hard. And if you want to learn more about us, you can go to incitizensunited.org and join us or learn more about us. Okay, I'm going to stop the share. We can just go to Q&A. I know that was a lot. Thanks for listening to me. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was a lot, and I'm sure we're going to have a whole bunch of questions, but I'm going to start because that's one of the advantages I get as president. So, boy, I think the first question I want to ask is, how does the dark money move outside the rules? Or is it just that the rules were changed? I mean, how is it that that dark money can move around and we don't have any way of knowing where it came from?
Yeah, so it is actually, we need to change the rules is the problem. The rules are written in such a way that there are these huge loopholes that have allowed dark money not just to exist, but to flourish. So here's what happens. Any money that's sent to candidates has to be fully disclosed. Any money that's sent to a super PAC has to be fully disclosed. But you all know about 501c4s, these social welfare organizations. They're supposed to be set up for a public service, and they're not supposed to be purely electoral in nature. But there's lots of ways to get around those rules. And since the Citizens United decision, what's happened is that those rules have been really taken advantage of. So I'll give you a great example. The Koch-Beck group, Americans for Prosperity, that is just a 501c4, which means they don't have to report their donors publicly at all. They file a 990 with the IRS, but because Republicans passed some changes to the rules in 2017, all they have to do is say anonymous for their donors, anonymous. And they're supposed to keep, the IRS is supposed to occasionally go check on those things. But all the money for the division that did that was taken away. So we don't even have that enforcement mechanism. So basically all this money is run through these 501c4s, which do electoral work without calling it electoral work. So rather than saying, and if you are running for Senate, vote for Ann, she's the best, they would say, Ann Calvert doesn't like puppies. Make sure you call Ann Calvert and tell her to like puppies, right? I'm being a little facetious, but you all have seen the ads. You know how these work. And so that's how they get around it. They just pass it from social welfare organization to social welfare organization.
Wow.
Oh, and an even funner one, more fun. I don't know, however that's supposed to be said. They give it to the group, Americans for Better America. And then that group can give it to the big super PACs, the electoral organizations. And the super PAC only has to report the Americans for a Better America, which again, you have no idea where that money came from initially. So this is particularly true on like what happened with the courts, is all they do is pass these big donations from one vehicle to another and just hide it basically through money laundering.
Wow. Laura?
Okay. So to me, all this boils down to that we need to get back to getting the Freedom to Vote Act passed. So is End Citizens United or Let America Vote involved in trying to bring that back? Because obviously that was the scariest legislation ever to all of these groups that are bringing in are, you know, sending in dark through the dark money channels, and they obviously got to two of the people who could have made that happen. So is there an effort being made to try and either resurrect or bring back the Freedom to Vote Act or try and get federal legislation passed again? Because I, as an American citizen,
I did it again. I'm so sorry, Laura. I muted you. I was trying to mute myself. I'm so sorry.
all right, so I don't see any change happening without change at the federal level, because it's the only avenue that I see that would undo what the states are doing now at the state level. So what's happening on that front? Because You know, I am one of the disillusioned American citizens that I'm trying my darndest to be involved with groups such as the League that can hopefully make a difference. But what's happening with what we need, which is the Freedom to Vote Act?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good and really important question. I also want to give a huge shout out to the League and to the National League and to Virginia, who runs the National League, for the incredible work that the League did during the fight for the Freedom to Vote Act. And if you all, I'm sure you all know, but during kind of the run up to the final vote, the League was with People for the American Way, was holding a White House protest every single Wednesday that kind of had different themes, and it forced so much attention and questions and pressure. It was really phenomenal. And so Virginia's amazing, the League is amazing, but I also wanted to give specific shout out about that work. Yeah, you're right. The Freedom to Vote Act would have stopped everything we just talked about. And it's why it was our number one priority. And to tell you I am disappointed in the outcome would be a vast understatement. It's more like I'm still gutted from it. And what I know is it is the right solutions to the problems that we are seeing. And so, yes, we are continuing to push on the federal level. The problem is I don't think that between now and the election that we're going to have a chance to pass a comprehensive package like that. What we are looking for is what are the federal lanes where we can get some of it, right? So there was, in President Biden's budget, there is $75 billion for election security and election administered funds, right? For states to be able to actually, have more drop boxes or have the new voting machines that they need, or kind of all of the different pieces. That's one thing. We are pushing right now to also get a vote on the Disclose Act, which would actually force transparency on all of these things we've been talking about. Because I think even just shining a light on this money, Senator Whitehouse, who is a huge champion on this, he likes to say, it's like cockroaches. If you shine a light on it, they all scatter away. So that is not my saying, that is Senator Whitehouse saying that, but it's pretty effective. So we're pushing for that. I think that you will see a vote on that. But here's what else we know. We managed to get about 12 US senators to flip their position on how they were voting on the filibuster, right? They had previously supported and upheld it. Folks like John Tester in Montana, who I love and is a huge champion on this. But even he started to see, like, we can't continue to uphold a filibuster that is that's literally killing our democracy. I think we changed who even gets to be in the US Senate now and their position on that particular issue, which means that it didn't end that day, but it will end. We have seen it, right? Like, I can see around the corner. And so we need more senators. We have to flip Wisconsin. We have to get Ron Johnson out of the Senate. We have a shot at Pennsylvania. We have a shot at North Carolina. We have having lived in Florida for a while, Florida always breaks my heart, but Val Demings just raised $10 million against Marco Rubio. So that's what we're doing on the federal level right now, is both trying to find any vehicle we can and actually changing the number of senators we have, because we know that's what's really needed to get it passed long term.
Okay, we've got 4 questions queued. We're going to go to Reva, and then I have one from the chat, and then Sandy, and then Mary. Reva?
Yeah, and I have something in the chat, and it's the same question I'm going to ask. I agree we need more people, different people in our government, either both on the state level and federal. But how are we going to do that if they pass these voting laws that prevent people like us who want those candidates in office from voting? Not me specifically, but there are other people who don't have the access, who maybe support those candidates, but their ballots are going to be thrown out just like they were in Texas. So how do we I mean, it's one thing to say you got to vote, but if your vote is going to be thrown out, they're basically just going to count the votes they want anyway if they get their way of controlling the election board. So I guess that's my question: as we can give these people money and support them, but when we go vote for them, their votes are thrown out. How are we going to prevent that?
This is exactly what they're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
They don't even have to keep everyone's vote from counting. They don't have to be that extreme. They just need they're just trying to shave off enough at the edges and rig the system so that they control the outcome. They control the outcome through whose vote gets to count, and then they control the outcome through the election sabotage and potentially overturning election results that they don't want. That's exactly what they're trying to do. Now, the thing is that's also what they tried to do in 2020, right? They tried to put up every single barrier they possibly could in almost every state that they could. They tried to spread disinformation to keep people from voting. And you know what happened is it was the largest turnout we've ever seen. So, you know, it is hard not to feel a little bit disillusioned when we see what's in front of us and the barriers that are being created. But I don't know about you guys, but maybe it's the Missouri grit in me. When someone tells me I can't do something, I also tend to get a bit of a chip on my shoulder, and I tend to show them 2 ways I can do it, right? So it should not be harder. Voting should not be running an obstacle course. But here's the other thing is I'm not going to give up, and I know none of you are, and we're not going to let the people who want to vote give up just because they're trying to make it harder. We're going to have to dig into that grid and help them even more. So we saw it in 2020. The fact that people stand in 12-hour lines and vote is unfair, and it's infuriating. And oh my God, it's inspiring that they care so much about our country that they're willing to do that.
Okay, from the chat, the question is, when the number of people are counted who say they think American democracy is in danger, does that include the ones who think the last election was stolen?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing is that is here's something Republicans and Democrats agree on right now. We all agree that that our democracy is in crisis for very different reasons. Right. And obviously, I tend to think that the Republicans are peddling disinformation to their base supporters, right, and outright lies. But they have peddled it enough that Republicans also believe our democracy is in danger. It's why we had a January 6th. So you actually have 2 sides that believe very strongly that we are in a state of crisis for our democracy.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to put in a disclaimer that, of course, we're nonpartisan and we don't endorse party or any candidates, but we are. This matters very much, because if people don't trust their democracy, they won't vote, and that is, of course, what we are interested in is access to voting for everyone. Sandy,
you know, and I would just add, Anne, this shouldn't be a partisan issue. No. I shouldn't have to talk about political parties when we're having a conversation about our democracy. And for most of our country's history, that's been really true. And the problem is that right now it's not true. And if we don't actually talk about the differences in what is happening with the 2 parties, we're also not talking about facts and what's happening. And I know the league is nonpartisan, and I wish that it was nonpartisan in our federal government right now too. But sadly, that's not where we're at.
Yeah. Sandy.
Building on that, Tiffany, do you know Amber McReynolds?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, she runs Vote at Home.
Well, she also became a member of the Postal Board.
And that's right, she did.
Yeah,
she did. So
here's a person who was a real rock star when it came to increasing voter access in Colorado. And she did it on she spoke to our state convention, 3 or 4 years ago. And she was adamant that she did it in a nonpartisan way, that she got support from both sides, to get Colorado to be, sort of like a Washington and Oregon, with all forms of access and increased turnout and so forth. But there's somebody that, to me, becomes a very good spokesperson for the both sides win kind of idea. And so I just, to the extent that she can be a voice for that and be an ally for what you do and so forth, I think would be great.
Yeah, she's wonderful, and she's absolutely right. I mean, Colorado passed basically universal vote by mail in, I think it was 2013. The first election then that they had, everyone likes to use it as a great example, because the first election that they had where the universal vote by mail system was used was the election where Cory Gardner was elected to the United States Senate. So helps Democrats, helps Republicans. Utah has long been a vote by mail state. Arizona, it had always been supported by Republicans and Democrats. Again, even in Kansas, right? Again, the state where I claim my political roots from, vote by mail was never partisan. Republicans wanted it, Democrats wanted it, everyone wanted it. It was never partisan until the last 3 years. So even getting it passed in Colorado, then, yeah, of course it was nonpartisan. But that has changed just in the last couple of years. But she is wonderful. I love her.
Sorry. Mary Lindsay and then Mary Herring.
Since obviously Citizens United started in the U.S. Supreme Court, though corporate personhood, first I'm sure had its roots in 1886 and just incrementally grew through all those decades till it really burst into common awareness with Citizens United. How much energy does your organization have going into the Supreme Court? And do you support efforts to change the court in the variety of ways that we sometimes hear about? Do you have some energy going into that?
Yeah. There's also a really good book out there that talks about how the idea of corporate personhood goes all the way back to the Catholic Church and English law, just kind of fascinating, and how then US law was built off of that. But you're absolutely right. Citizens United was an outcome of like a build that had been happening over 100 years. Here's the thing. In 2016, when Merrick Garland was nominated, we had the chance to actually end up with a 5-4 court that I believe would have overturned Citizens United, that we would have been able to bring a case and would have been able to overturn that. At the moment, we are in a place where we have a 6-3 Supreme Court where we don't believe that they would overturn it. We've seen, I think we're up to 20 states pass ballot measures in the state to say that Citizens United should be overturned, including states like Montana with 72% of the vote. We know that this is an issue that even Republican voters want to see overturned, but we are going to have to continue to build legislative wins through Congress and build grassroots power to end up in a position where eventually we can change the makeup of the court and or figure out a way to create enough state pressure that we are changing the outcome. After 2016, when they held open that Merrick Garland seat and then, filled it, it really, I think, we were very close to having a court that would have overturned it, and now we're in a decades-long fight over this, right? So do we support efforts to expand the court and to change the court? Yeah, happy to look at any and all of it. There hasn't been real unified agreement on the federal level of what that should look like and how to. The concern is, how do you address the partisanship of the court and the politicization of the court without making it seem even more partisan and even more political. Right now, you have only 40% of Americans who actually have a favorable opinion of the court, right? That's the lowest it's ever been. So we're in real trouble. Here's the other thing. We've been pushing for even something as simple as, you know, the Supreme Court is the only body in America that doesn't have ethics in place, right? So we're also pushing for just like some really small things. How about some ethics reforms? How about financial disclosure and transparency so that you can't have these big dark money groups and corporations taking the justices out for dinner? How about, you know, making sure that Supreme Court justices whose wives try to overturn election results have to recuse themselves from, you know, certain cases?
But term limits.
Yeah, I am all for that. So I think that there are ways to also address some of the problems we see with the court without only expanding it. I think that there are lots of different reform methods out there. And I think the very first is that they should be concerned about the way that they are dropping in Americans' opinion.
Mary Herring? You're on mute.
Oh, you're still
Mary,
muted.
You're still muted.
Okay, sorry. Thanks for being here today, Tiffany. This has been really interesting information. I guess my question is around, you know, our league already does a lot of things, like we do voter registration drives and things of that sort that are really kind of playing within the rules. So, but unfortunately, some other folks are trying to change the rules, and hence Citizens United and some of the changes that have been made to election laws in various states. So my question is, what is it? What should our league and folks in our league who are very concerned about this, what actions can we take? What actions should we take away from today to try to solve some of these issues?
Well, I think that, you know, there's a reason we got the Freedom to Vote Act as close as we did to passing. And that wasn't just because it was the right thing to do, because Congress never just does the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do combined with power and momentum. And the league can be hugely helpful in building power and momentum around these issues, right? You can make sure and I'm sure you're already doing this, but you know, when there are bad proposals in Missouri or nationally, writing letters, making phone calls, attending rallies, protesting, writing letters to the editor. These things matter. They don't always feel like they matter, but I promise you that in both the State House and in Congress, those elected officials are always keeping track of where public opinion is on an issue. And here's the other thing. If we want to end up passing proactive legislation, then we have to create enough momentum that it is what the elected officials feel like they have to act on. And the league can be helpful with that too, right? Like, of course you should keep registering voters and fight disinformation and sign up poll workers. Yes to all that. But also think about it as they only take on whatever's right in front of their face and that they are thinking about and hearing about day in and day out. So a whole lot of the campaign to pass the Freedom to Vote Act was about building an echo chamber, making it loud enough that they felt that they had to act, that they couldn't get away with just like introducing a bill and having people co-sponsor it. They had to force a vote. They had to force the debate. And doing that took it took millions of people across the country. It took hundreds of thousands of phone calls into the different Senate offices. It took being arrested at the White House, like the league was doing. It took ads, it took letters writing. It was all about how do you create an echo chamber? How do you create a situation where it was impossible for them not to act? And that's what you want to do, both on the defensive side and the offensive side, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I would like to thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. I've learned so much, and I also feel more optimistic and like we can make a change. So thank you. So even though so much negative information, but still, I really feel like we can make a change. So thank you very much. Can we give Tiffany a round of applause? You can unmute and applaud.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
And can we recognize the fact that we had not only Bill Dickinson, but Melissa Kelly Foxhoven are two new members who attended the meeting today. And we have two possible members, Pam Vernon and Michael Donegan, are not members of the league yet. We certainly hope that they will become. And I have sent messages to you, Pam and Michael, in the chat.
Yes, welcome, welcome. And I know that we have some other members that have joined since the beginning of the year. Do you want to let us know who those people are? I have it,
Yes.
you sent it to me on my phone, but it's teeny tiny. So
That's
if you'll
okay.
read it, I appreciate.
We are getting about one new member every week since the beginning of January. Carol Boris, Bella Hughes, Patricia Fitzpatrick, Kelly Edmondson, Brandy Blackburn, Melissa Kelly Foxhoven, Haley Stock, Rebecca Brozovich, Bill Dickinson, and Marion James Grant have all joined since January 1st.
Yep. So if you see them at a committee meeting or anything else, be sure to say hi and be warm and welcoming. And I have some other announcements that I want to make. Let me find so we have two delegate spots open for the National Convention. So I hope that you all will give consideration to going to the National Convention this year. It's in June in Denver. And so you can get some more information from me. You can also go to the national website. There's a ton of information on the national website about the National Convention. So consider that. Let me know if you're interested. I'm driving. So carpool, podcasts. I have eclectic taste in music. Let's see. We also have a state convention coming up, or a state conference, I'm sorry, coming up April 30th. It's in Springfield, Missouri. You can attend virtually, or you can attend in person. And so that's another thing I'd like everybody to consider going to. It is a much less expensive proposal than the National Convention. The National Convention is a little pricey, but it is 3 days. The state conference is $25 if you go in person and $10 if you go virtually. We have some grant money possibility. Actually, Dawn, do you want to just talk about that, or would you rather I?
So yeah, the Athenaeum Group just sold their building, and they have money they need to donate, and they're looking to give away amounts of between $1,000 and $10,000, and they're particularly interested in voter registration. This information came to me through Betty Yaki. But if anybody has any thoughts on how we might use substantial money for voter registration, send me an email. We'll need to write something up, but they've got money to give away now.
Yeah, so we need to kind of pull something together for that pretty soon. And from the chat, also, we neglected to mention that Anna, and I don't think I'm going to get your name pronounced correctly. Anna, are you still here? Your last name? Judy Ann, can you tell me how to pronounce Anna's last name?
Yeah, it's Anna Pruce,
Thank you.
our first intern, and also a new member. Attended today.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so we want to welcome her too. We're so excited to have her join. She's done great work this past semester as our social media intern, and we're so happy that she's staying on as a member, as a full-fledged member. So yay. And then Janelle asked if we could have the slideshow presentation, and Tiffany said, yes, we can. So Tiffany, if you don't mind emailing that to me, I can make it available to all of our members. Thank you very much. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is that you'll be getting an email about program planning in the next day or two. Please look for that. It'll come from me. This will be your last chance. We've gotten a lot of input already, and I'll tell you what that input is, but this will be your last chance to put something before the board for board approval and support with regard to program planning. So I won't go into any details here. We've talked about it before, and we'll talk about it again, but look for that email in the next day or two. So we are officially done, but Donna, did you have a question or something else to say?
Well, you know, I always want to say something, but we have two action days sponsored, one by the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, April 20th, going to Jefferson City to protect voter rights, and one May 3rd concerning the initiative petition action day. And both of those are important, and I hope League will support and could carpool.
Yeah, and we will put information on the website, at least for the May 3rd. We should have something on the website where you could check the volunteer section and sign up to go and coordinate carpooling. We'll try to do that for April 20th as well, if we can. So,
and on April 12th or Tuesday is Thank Your Election Workers Day. And the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition is doing a virtual event at 6:30 that night with having people like Laura Elam from the Kansas City Election Board talk about their jobs, and maybe we can hold up a sign that says thank you or something. So you'll be getting emails.
Yeah, and Tiffany talked about how important that is, and the statistics about election workers and how many poll workers are resigning because of the harassment. So that's a pretty important issue for us to say thank you to the poll workers and consider stepping up to become poll workers ourselves. Sandy has agreed to coordinate our poll worker program, where we go and work the polls and then donate our payment for that day. I hate to call it a salary since it's a 1 day or 2 day a week or a 2 day a year job, but if we have 10 or more people who donate their pay for that day, then the pay can come actually directly to the league as from the Board of Elections. So that's for Kansas City, Missouri Board of Election. At this point, it's only Kansas City, Missouri Board of Elections. So only Kansas City, Missouri residents can participate. But Sandy, you have more?
Well, no, I was going to say two things. One, this grant money that Don mentioned, we're talking about voter registration, always important. The real issue is turnout. And I worked this election list last Tuesday at Brush Creek. I don't know how many were registered voters for that precinct and that ward in those precincts. We had 234 voters. That was it. Now, granted, not a real compelling election to attend, but a lot of those people that showed up were kind of sad to see an empty gymnasium. And I said, well, don't forget the midterms. And of course, they all said, absolutely, they got it. But I said, pass the word. I think getting out the vote is as important, if not more important, than registration. So that's that pitch. The other thing is, are we live in person in May?
Oh, thank you for reminding me. Yes, we are. Thank you, Sandy. Yes.
Good.
Yes. I totally forgot. We are going back to in person in May. I'm so excited because half of you I've never met in person, and the half I have, I miss. So yes, we're going back in person. We are at the Blueford branch of the public library, And we will have social hour from 9:30 until 10. We may get there a little early. The library doesn't open until 9. So if you get there early, you can be part of the setup crew. And we will have our business meeting. So we don't have a program for that day. We will be doing some hard work, talking about program for the next year and talking about revisiting some of our bylaws and our positions, but we get to do it together. So yes, we are in person. Thank you, Sandy. I cannot believe I left that off my list of announcements.
Is it a hybrid or just in person?
It will be a hybrid. We will stream it. That is to be determined exactly how it will be streamed, but it will be, at the very least, it will be on Facebook. I would imagine we will be on Zoom as well, but our open Zoom meetings are a little vulnerable. So I don't know if it'll be a webinar or we don't know how we'll do it, because we want it to be as interactive as possible. So that.
And there will be voting.
And there will be voting. Yeah. So it needs to be as interactive as possible. So, yeah, we'll get our tech team together and figure that out. We have days to do that. All right. Well, thank you again, Tiffany, for such a great program. We sure appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
And
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
do you want to mention Monday's meeting?
Well, we do have the Legislative Alert Committee, Legislative Action Committee, I'm sorry, that's getting together on Mondays at 11:30.
And we need people.
And we do need people. We're halfway through the legislative session. I'm so pleased. I did a little digging and we've got 60% of our members are opening the Legislative Alert. That's a lot. So I think you guys are reading and looking at what's happening in the legislature. And I hope clicking those links, as Tiffany said, it really does matter when we make our voices heard, and the echo chamber, I'm going to remember that, echo chamber, that we have to create an echo chamber. And that's exactly what happens when you submit testimony or call your legislator. And I know sometimes it feels like we just are shouting into the void, but if there are enough of us shouting into the void, it echoes and it makes a difference. So thank you. All right, if there's nothing else, I'm going to adjourn this meeting, and thank you so much for coming and for such a wonderful morning. Thank you.